Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to show you all the books that I read in February, and I actually had quite a good reading month because I picked up a total of 8 books, and that's definitely more than what I normally read. Now that number is a little bit skewed because some of these books are shorter than what I normally pick up, but even with that in mind, my month was better than usual. Of those 8 books, 7 were fantasy books and 1 was science fiction, and all of them were in the adult age range. I read 5 of those physically and then 3 I listened to on audiobook, and that's something that I'm quite happy with because I would like that number to remain 50-50, and that's something that I managed to do in February as well. Now, I did mention a while ago that I would like to read more standalones this year because last year I only read 4, and my goal for 2021 was to read around 10 standalones. And of those 8 books that I read this month, 6 were standalones. So that's something that I was quite surprised by because I didn't really notice that throughout the month. And then when I was looking at all of them, 6 were standalones. So I'm also quite happy with that. And then the 2 other ones were beginnings of series. And I'm a little bit less happy with that because that means that for the month of February, I didn't continue on any of my series that I already started previously, which is something that I would like to prioritize in the upcoming months, because in April I will only read from series that I have already started in order to make a little bit of a dent in my series TBR, but that's for April. For now, that means that I did start 2 additional series that I would like to finish as soon as possible because I actually enjoyed both. But without further ado, I'm just going to go over them chronologically, but first I will talk about 2 books that I DNF'd. And the first DNF, I'm not really sure if you can call it a book DNF because I only read 2 pages before I decided that I just didn't want to continue, but it's definitely a series DNF because that book is Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan, which is the 5th book in the Wheel of Time series. Now this one was on my winter TBR and it was kinda a last chance for the entire series because I needed to continue with it for a couple of months now, and I decided if I'm not going to pick it up in the winter when it's really my priority to pick it up, then that just means that I'm not enjoying the series enough to continue. So I did read the previous 4 books in the series. I enjoyed some parts of it, I disliked others, and I don't know about you guys, but in general for me, I rather read a series that is just good, the whole line, than a series that has parts that I absolutely love, but then also parts that I absolutely hate. So both of those types of books would be 3 out of 5 stars, but the ones with ups and downs is one that I would definitely not enjoy and not want to continue, and that's definitely what happened here. Because even though I'm enjoying the series, it's fine. There are just so many books that I would rather pick up, and if this was a trilogy and I still needed to read 1 or 2 books, that's fine. I'll just power through and enjoy my time. But in this case, I would need to read 10 books. The slog is coming and I just don't feel like putting myself through that for now. Does it mean that I will never pick up Wheel of Time? No, it might that I pick it up, but it's highly unlikely with everything else that I'm more excited about, and my TBR will probably only get longer and longer. So for now, I don't think that I will pick this up anytime soon or even this year. I know that some of you might be disappointed about that, but yeah, this just isn't the series for me, it seems. Then the next book that I DNF'd was definitely a problem with me and not a problem with the book, but that was A Foreign Country by Charles Cumming. This is a spy thriller kind of book, which is something that I've never read in the past, and I picked it up on audiobook. And I think that for new genres that you're not really acquainted with, that might not be the best thing to do, especially for this one. That was a major problem for me, I think, because the narrator it felt like he was reading a newspaper. And if you're used to fantasy narrators, that's something that's obviously not done for that genre, but I think that maybe for a spy thriller kind of book, that's what you are going to get, and that's more fitting for those genres. But that made me really not liking the book, or at least not via audiobook. And I didn't really have it on e-reader or anything like that, so I just decided to, quit while I was still ahead. I only read 2 chapters through audiobook, and I just wasn't feeling it. There were other books that were higher on my priority list, so that's why I DNF'd it. But now we're going to jump into some books that I actually enjoyed and completed in the month of January. And the first book that I picked up was The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. This is a fantasy standalone that follows a main character, Silence, who is a transgender. And the author, Alex Myers, is actually also a transgender. So if you want to support people from the LGBT plus community, then I highly recommend that you pick this one up because I actually quite enjoyed it. In this story you follow Silence. Silence was born as a girl, but their father decided to raise them as a boy because in this world, which is medieval England, girls cannot inherit while boys can. So you actually follow Silence when they are growing up and the kind of problems that arise from this situation. I think that this was handled very well. Of course, I am not a part of the LGBT plus community and Alex Myers is, so I cannot really critique the way that they portrayed Silence, but as somebody who's not a part of the community, I do think that it was handled very well and I quite enjoyed the story. If anything, I did like to see a little bit more of Silence as a grown-up, because you only see them growing up, so childhood and then teenage years. But all in all, I quite enjoyed it. There is some mention of Merlin. I also liked that, how Merlin was portrayed in this story. So if anything of this sounds interesting to you, I do recommend that you pick it up. I listened to this through audiobook and I thought that the narrator was doing a very good job as well. So if you like audiobooks, maybe give this one a try through audiobook. At the same time, I was reading a physical book, and that was Circe by Madeline Miller. I won't go into this too deeply because I am planning to do a review of Circe together with another book, and that will go up this weekend. I know that I've been saying that for quite a while now, but it will happen. Now, for Circe, I must say this is, of course, a story based on Greek mythology. You follow Circe, who is a witch in the original tales, but you don't really hear a lot about her, if I'm not mistaken. I'm definitely not an expert on Greek mythology, but here, of course, her story is greatly expanded. I know that this is a book that BookTube loves, and I quite enjoyed it, but I did have some issues with it, especially with not being too connected to the main character and the lack of an overarching plot, in my opinion. But all in all, I did enjoy this story, and I would recommend it, especially if you're a fan of Greek mythology. But if you want to know more, then definitely look out for my review that will be uploaded tomorrow. After that, I picked up The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, and I read this in physical form. And this was actually a part of a buddy read together with Steve from Steve Talks About Books and Stuff and Leslie from The Nerdy Narrative. And we already had an online meetup where we talked about this first book, and I will link that down below. This was over at Steve's channel, but this was of course spoiler filled. So if you haven't read the book yet, don't click on that link. My spoiler-free thoughts for this one are that I greatly enjoyed it. This is of course a grim dark book, even though it wasn't as dark as I was expecting, and it was much more humorous than I thought it would be. I laughed out loud a couple of times, which doesn't happen too often when I'm reading a book, so that's definitely a big plus for this one. And I greatly enjoyed the characters. I even enjoyed Jezal a lot, which I think most people don't really like, but I like that frat boy character that thinks he's all that, but he's actually not. So I am looking forward to seeing a little bit more of him in the next books, and him hopefully making a fool out of himself, because then I can get another chuckle out of it. In general, I know that a lot of people say this is definitely character focused, not plot focused, and that's true. And I do hope to see a little bit more plot in the next books. Now, in general, when I am reading a character focused book and I am thinking about the plot, that means that the characters aren't that well developed. But here I think that wanting more plot is not a critique on his characters, because they are amazing, but it's more an applaud for the small amount of plot that is present here. Because the little snippets that you get for the magic system and the world building are so amazing that I would like to see more of that, even though the characters alone are enough to get me through these books and be very enthusiastic for everything else. But I do hope that we see a little bit more of the plot, and especially the magic system, because it's definitely a little bit darker than what we usually see, and I like dark magic systems. So Before They Are Hanged is on my TBR for this month, March, and I look forward to discussing that one together with Steve and Leslie as well. Then I wanted to mix things up a little bit after that grim dark book, so I picked up a fairy tale, and that is The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia A. McKillop. So as I said, this is a fairy tale, and you follow a wizard called Sybil with a lot of animal companions. So if that's something that you enjoy, then definitely pick this one up as well, because I quite enjoyed it myself as well. However, be aware that this is a quite short book. It's 200 pages in total, so it's definitely a quick read, and this is a fairy tale. It's not a fairy tale retelling, which is something that I new, but I didn't really actively realize while I was reading this. So even though I like fairy tale retellings because they use the fairy tale atmosphere and you definitely get that magical feeling, they greatly expand their characters and their plot as well as their world building most of the time. But this is a fairy tale, and so it's definitely more related to other original fairy tales where the characters aren't that well developed, the plot isn't that well developed, and you have one big message that is quite clear throughout the book. So this was definitely a more simple read, even though I don't want you to take that up too negatively because I did enjoy it. But that's something that you should know, that it's more an original fairy tale instead of a fairy tale retelling. And then I picked up what was probably my favorite read of February, and I also read this in physical form, and that is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. This is again one that I will dual review together with Cersei, so that video will be up tomorrow, and definitely check that one out, because even though Cersei is BookTube's darling, I think that The Witch's Heart tried to do what Cersei was doing, but maybe better, or at least it improved in a couple of things that I thought was lacking in Cersei, or what I didn't enjoy. I know that some people might enjoy that, I didn't, and I think that the small complaints that I had with Cersei were completely resolved in this one. So in The Witch's Heart you also follow a witch, but not in Greek mythology, but in Norse mythology. You have the appearance of the trickster Loki, you have some other things that are quite important in Norse mythology. Again, I'm not an expert in that, so I do think that I missed some things or some connections, but all in all, I greatly enjoyed this story, and I highly recommend that you pick this one up, even if you might not have enjoyed Cersei that much. But for that, I will definitely pick up some similarities and differences in my review. So if you're wondering if you would like this, even though you didn't like Cersei that much, definitely look out for that. And then I picked up my first ever sci-fi book, if you don't count 1984, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I actually did a complete vlog about this book, so I will link that down below. I had a lot of non-spoiler thoughts. The entire vlog is non-spoiler. In general and in short, I enjoyed this book, but I did have some problems, especially with the main character Darrow. He was not consistent in a lot of things, and also in how old he felt. I had a lot of problems with that. And I thought that the world, the dystopian society, wasn't really that well developed, and there were some logical issues, at least for me. But knowing that, and knowing that the second and the third book are a lot better, according to a lot of people who said I had similar issues with the first book, but don't worry, the second book is amazing and a lot of those issues are resolved in that book. I am quite excited to pick up the second and the third one. I have all three, so I'm definitely going to make progress in this series soon. And then the last book that I completed in February, and I actually cheated a little bit here because I finished this in the 1st or the 2nd of March, but I was listening to this for 2 weeks in February, so it counts in my opinion, and that is Hall of Smoke by H.M. Long. This is a fantasy standalone book, and I actually talked a lot about this in my last haul, which I will link down below, so I won't go over the synopsis too much, but this is definitely Viking inspired a little bit, in my opinion, also Norse mythology inspired, even though this takes place in a completely new world. You have a big presence of the gods that walk among men, so if that's a trope that you enjoy, pick this one up. I think that this is a little bit grimdark, but definitely not too much, so maybe you have an aversion against grimdark, then I would still think you would like this, even though there's a lot of action, there's a lot of fighting involved as well. You have a female badass character, and I quite enjoyed this book, but the ending was a little bit convoluted for me, and in the end, this is one of those books that I would like to reread just to see if everything makes sense with knowing what I know at the end of the book. And I don't think that it will. Well, but that doesn't really matter, I still enjoyed it. But it's a little bit like with Red Rising, that I think some characters' decisions weren't that logical if you know which side they were on in the end. But all in all, I did enjoy this. I think that this is a debut novel from this author, so I am highly excited to pick up anything new from them if it comes out. So hi again. If you're wondering why the angle is changed all of a sudden, that's because I was going over my recordings and I saw that I talked about 7 books, but I was pretty sure that I read 8, and it took me a while to figure out what the 8th book was again, and that is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. So this is a book that I listened to on audiobook. I don't physically own it. I think that's why I looked over it a little bit. And it's a very short book. It's only 4 hours long on audiobook. I think it's around 160 pages in physical form. And in this book, you follow the descendants of pregnant African slaves that were thrown overboard, and their babies survived, and they turn into some kinds of mermaid. And in these groups that have survived, you have one character or one person who is the historian, and they keep all of the memories of the past generations, and they actually relive them somehow. And we follow this historian in that group of people or of descendants of these African slaves who cannot really live with those memories any longer. And she tries to find out what she can do against that, because at this point in her life, she feels that if she needs to carry these any longer, she will not survive. So this is definitely a very important book with a lot of heartbreaking themes. I think if you want to know a little bit more about generational trauma, this is definitely a good read for that. However, I didn't absolutely love it because it's a little bit too short for me, and that made that these important themes weren't as well explored as I would have liked. But that's a problem with me. I have a big problem with short books in general. I don't enjoy short stories that much. But I think that if this was more explored, then I would have definitely liked it better. Even though I also understand that that was not what this book was trying to do. I also think that the narrator, even though this is David Dix, and I know that he is somehow connected with this book, I think that he made a song about it. I'm from Belgium. I've never heard of that person before. But even though I think that it's very good that he narrated this book because he was involved with the process of the writing of it, I didn't really think he was the best narrator for it technique-wise, which also didn't really help that much. So I think if I would have read it physically, I would have enjoyed it more. But that being said, I do think for what it was trying to do, it's a good book. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. But if you want to know more about these very important themes, if you want to support these authors, I would definitely recommend it, that you pick it up knowing that it is quite short and that it's not going to be, a complete delving into these subjects. So those were all the books that I read in February. I'm quite happy that I picked up so many and that I read so many standalones, and more than anything that I actually enjoyed all of them, which is something that's pretty rare for me. So all in all, I'm quite happy with all of these. Have you read any of these? Then please let me know in the comments down below. And also let me know what your favorite book of February was, so I can have a look at that myself. I hope you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!